Yeah, I think it certainly helps. I mean, at the beginning of this latest injury for him, I wasn't so sure how much of an impact this would have, but it's been a huge impact. He has absolutely been the number 2 center that the Flyers hoped he could be. His offensive production has been very good. He's got 16 points in his last 16 games, but it comes at the right time with Claude Giroux being out of the lineup for the Flyers. So we'll see what happens here, but that can only be good news for the Flyers because Ron Hextall's already told himself that he's not going to be a buyer, that there's not going to be a rental coming in here to try and make a late push. So it's up to the guys that are in the room right now.
Yeah, Couturier back tonight for the Flyers, but no Claude Giroux. Is this a long-term thing, or should he be back when the Flyers get back in action, which, of course, is when the Flyers play tonight and then Thursday night, right?
Yeah, Thursday's still up in the air for Claude Giroux. The Flyers aren't saying if it's a concussion or not, but I would think that it would be around that kind of table for Giroux. I don't believe he skated this morning. He did not make the trip, but I don't think he was on the ice in Voorhees. But I don't think it should be terribly long. So that in itself is good news for the Flyers. And whenever they can get both Giroux and Couturier on the ice together, they might have a little bit more of a shot. But 5 points, even at this time of year, even with 22 games I think they have left, or 23 games. That's still a lot, because even when the Flyers win and they cut it to 3 and you go down to the locker room and say, hey, what do you guys think about being 3 points out? It seems like there's another team that night that wins, and all of a sudden they're back to 5 points out again before they even step on the pump. So I think I don't know if it's too little too late, but it'll certainly help.
Well, Dave, they're 63, Carolina 64. Tonight is a big game, even though Carolina has 2 games at hand on the Flyers. But, they passed over a couple of teams. They're moving their way up that chain a little bit here. But a game like today is just monumental if they want to have any thoughts.
Yeah, and the Flyers have had pretty good luck against Carolina so far this year. But the Flyers have 2 games in hand on the Hurricanes. They've played 2 fewer games. So that is good news for the Flyers. And, even if they, in any fashion tonight, they'll leapfrog over them. They'll be tied in points, but because the Flyers have 2 games in hand on them, they would be listed ahead of them with only the Jersey Devils in between. Actually, I guess if the Flyers win, they would leapfrog Jersey as well, because they would have a game in hand on them. So, that would put the Flyers a little bit closer.
Yep.
It's a little bit of spin the wheels right now. So many more things have to play out, and the Flyers had more games in hand and kind of threw them away. So, you can still talk about the 2 that are left for some of these opponents that they have, but the Flyers have to do something with them.
Michael Del Zotto, he's going to be out for the year. What kind of impact is that going to be on this team?
Yeah, well, he hasn't been around for the last, week or so. It's just that the diagnosis finally came down for exactly what it would be. That is a big loss. I mean, the Flyers spent most of this first half of the season kind of grooming him to be a more well-rounded guy, and they leaned on him very heavily, especially when Mark Streit was out. That's kind of what got the ball rolling on all that, to be really their number 1 guy, their de facto number 1 guy. He was playing in all situations for them, on the PK, on penalty power play rather, and a ton of minutes at even strength. So they're replacing that by committee now. The fact that Shane Gostisbehere is on this ridiculous point streak certainly helps them as well. But that'll certainly be a loss for the Flyers. But knowing that it's 3 to 4 months, even if they do sneak in the back door of the playoffs, they won't get him back.
Dave, I would assume he has exceeded expectations to some extent with this point streak, but Gostisbehere has got to be a guy that gives you the feeling that he's a guy that they can certainly start to build around. But they've got so many young defenders behind him. I mean, at what point do they start to say, look, he could handle it? We want to start to see some of these other young guys get an opportunity.
Well, I think Ivan Provorov is probably the guy that's most next ready. And because of the rules with the Canadian Hockey League and stuff, they can't recall him right now. So there's really no chance of that happening right now. Samuel Morin might come up before the end of the year, but you're absolutely right. Shane Gostisbehere has exceeded everyone's expectations. It was interesting to talk to Ron Hextall the other day, and he said, look, everybody's talking about, is this kid worthy of the Calder Trophy? Would he be higher up on everybody's list if he hadn't, started the season in the American Hockey League? And Ron Hextall's response to that is, well, we didn't know what he was going to be, and he's playing much better now in the NHL than he was for those 14 games in the AHL. and he said that those games were really a good way of kind of easing him back into action after missing so much of last season with that, terrible knee injury that he had. So I think he's definitely something that they're able to build around, and they're going to build around. As for what comes next, I think we'll see it next year, not this year.
Yeah, now you mentioned, and you've written about this, Dave, that Hextall has basically said we're not going to be buyers at the deadline. But let's say they, the next couple of nights here, they play a game against Carolina, which is big for them. Minnesota on Thursday. They got the afternoon game on Saturday before that deadline comes up, Tuesday. Could that change his mind at all?
In terms of being a buyer?
Yeah.
No, I think he's steadfast in saying that he won't be bringing anybody else in. To him, if this team cuts it closer with the roster that they have, then they can finish the job themselves. What he didn't say was that we won't be sellers. So I think that's something to watch for by Monday. I mean, there's a handful of games, like you just mentioned, between now and then. But it would be interesting to see if he started selling off pieces. I think that he thinks that this team still has a shot at making up the ground on the 5 points that they're behind right now. But I don't think that he can bank on it, and he's not going to try and make a push this year at the risk of blowing his long-term goal, which is, all the patient talk that we've been hearing about all year, really ever since he was promoted to be general manager of the team.
Dave, we saw Mason get banged up the other night in that game against Toronto. Neuwirth tonight?
Yes, Neuwirth will start tonight. I think the Flyers kind of have two goalies right now that, as I wrote the other day, barely fit the definition of healthy. I think neither of them are even close to 100%. But Neuwirth is kind of the healthier of the two right now, so he'll get the call.
All right, that was an entertaining game against Toronto. Nice win, though, without Giroux in the lineup. He won't be there again tonight, but they will get Sean Couturier back. Who's he playing with? Where are they putting him?
He's got Michael Raffel and Jake Voracek on his line, so there's certainly the potential for offense.
All right, good stuff with Dave, of course, at Dave G. Isaac, Courier Post online, and Dave's got a new mailbag up as well. He was having a good time at the Fairfield Inn, it seems like. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks for having me.